travel ban lifted. The Trump administration plans tougher entry procedures for refugees. Questions remain. A top U.S. general reveals new information in the Niger attack investigation. We'll have a report from the State Department. Florida Representative Rooney, the former ambassador to the Holy See, talks about Catholic social teaching in American politics. And Pope Francis's letter, a report from Rome about the missive written by the Holy Father on the liturgy. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, October 24th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A U.S. appeals court clears the way for a 17-year-old immigrant held in federal custody to have an abortion. Today's ruling overrules a 3-judge panel that blocked the teen from obtaining the procedure. President Donald Trump's 120-day worldwide ban on refugees ends today, but his administration is preparing to unveil tougher new screening procedures. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The Trump administration has been reviewing the current refugee vetting process during this ban, and officials are expected to announce more stringent background checks going forward. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops says it welcomes the end of the ban. And in a statement, the Bishops' Conference Executive Director of Migration and Refugee Services tells me, quote, "We look for the opportunity to see our government and its agencies involved in refugee vetting move with dispatch to save the lives of families and children who cannot return to their home countries and who cannot live with dignity where they are. Our parishes and dioceses stand ready to help." Outside the White House today, a group of about 100 protesters called on the Trump administration to extend more protections for immigrants and refugees. I spoke with an organizer from a New York-based group that advocates for thousands of immigrants. He says the vetting process is already strong enough.
That's our hope, that this administration will begin to stop attacking immigrant and refugee communities and begin to see these people for the survivors that they are, and people who have come to this country in search for a better life.
President Trump issued a statement last month on refugees saying maintaining strong borders is a vital component of any security policy, and a responsible approach to refugees is one that seeks the eventual return of refugees to their home countries so they can help to rebuild their own nations. President Trump also used that statement to announce he was reducing the annual cap for refugees entering the United States to a maximum of 45,000 for fiscal year 2018. That is a drop from the 110,000 annual limit on refugee numbers put in place last year by President Obama. Lauren.
Mark, what has the Pope said regarding the plight of refugees?
In August, Pope Francis issued a document which lays out 20 action points for responding to migrants and refugees. The Pope says personal safety and dignity should be balanced alongside concerns for national security. President Trump campaigned on a strong stance of national security above all else, so we will see how this plays out. Lauren.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. This afternoon, Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona says he will not seek re-election next year. We will have analysis later in the broadcast. President Trump offers a pep talk on tax reform to Senate Republicans. He's hoping to pass the first tax plan without help from Democrats. Our eyes and ears at the Capitol. Jason Calvi joins us now. Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. In a rare trip to Capitol Hill, President Trump comes for lunch to get Republicans in line. But he was greeted by a protester throwing Russian flags at him. President Trump didn't flinch when he walked by a lone protester arrested by Capitol Hill police. The president's hungry for victory after failing to repeal Obamacare. Next on the Republican plate, tax reform, the promise of big league tax cuts for both corporations and for people. But many details still need to be ironed out. Coming out of the lunch, Senator Lindsey Graham tells me Republicans need this. And if you don't get tax reform down, did he talk about what's going to happen in 2018?
Oh, I think we all know we're dead.
Did he talk about that?
Well, I think he's mentioned that in the past, but he didn't dwell on that. He just said it's imperative that if we fail on tax cuts, then it's just going to be hard for this party to survive. 2018 could be a disaster. He did mention that.
The House on Thursday will vote on a Senate-passed budget framework. It'll open the door for a special process called reconciliation. Using that, Republicans will be able to pass tax reform with a simple majority in the Senate, not the usual 60 votes. That means they can do it without any support from Democrats.
By completing this budget, that is one big step closer toward historic tax reform, which means we're one big step closer toward a pay raise for middle-income families, for hardworking taxpayers.
While the tax reform bill isn't public yet, Republicans say it will double the standard deduction used by most Americans, simplify the tax code, cutting the number of tax brackets from the current 7 to just 3 or 4. It would also eliminate the so-called death tax, the tax on multi-million-dollar inheritances. Now, Senate Democrats claim the Republicans aren't telling the truth. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says the GOP tax cuts will help the rich, not the middle class. He says it will add to the deficit. Lauren?
Earlier today, the president had a war of words with Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, Jason, saying he couldn't get elected dog catcher. What's happening with this?
Well, I did talk to Senator Lindsey Graham about this. He said there was no interaction between Senator Corker and Trump during their lunch today. Trump sent out 5 tweets blasting Senator Corker, calling him incompetent, while Corker called Trump utterly untruthful president.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thank you. We'll see you later in the program. Congressman Francis Rooney, a Republican from Florida and the former ambassador to the Holy See during the George W. Bush administration, joins us now. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me back on, Lauren.
Yesterday, you spoke to the Catholic University of America on the importance of subsidiarity in American politics. That's a core Catholic teaching, social teaching that relates to the value of civil society. Why are you talking to college students about subsidiarity?
Well, I wanted to highlight the parallels or the fact that subsidiarity is reflected in our core American experience, that our federalism, our system of state, local, and federal governments, as divided by the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution, are a sort of American version of subsidiarity.
Why do you think that this principle should be applied when it comes to Medicaid?
Well, you know, the Medicaid reforms that we were trying to pass here seem to me to fit with this idea of subsidiarity, of allowing the lowest element that's capable of solving a problem to resolve it, and resolve a problem closest to the people who are affected by it. And that's exactly what the idea of turning the money over to the states would do, put the decisions closer to the voters, and allow each state to tailor programs to their particular populations.
Speaker of the House Paul Ryan today said his goal is to get tax reform out of the House by Thanksgiving. And as a Catholic and a politician, do you think that the current efforts at tax reform align with Catholic social teaching?
Well, I'm not 100% sure what they are. We haven't read the bill yet, but there have been a few concepts floated around. One of the concepts I do like is lowering corporate taxes so that we'll stimulate capital investment and reduce the incentive that exists now for many multinational companies to park their cash overseas.
Congressman Rooney, tell me your thoughts on President Trump's visit today to Capitol Hill.
Well, there's been a lot said about that today. I hope that they use it as an opportunity to exchange ideas on points in tax reform that the White House would find appealing and points that they may not, and avoid some of the open warfare that's happened in the press when differences of opinion have been aired there.
Before you go, could you please update us on the situation of hurricane relief efforts in your district in Florida?
Well, we're coming along. We had a wide variety of damage. We had areas that were hardly damaged at all, and we had areas where over 80% of the homes were condemned. The people who suffered the most damage, as is unfortunately often the case, were the ones who could least afford to do it. and they're the people that need the most help. Some of them still have water damages. We have made sure that there are FEMA, we call them FEMA fairs, that there are FEMA offices set up around the district along with SBA and HUD to make so people can become aware of what's available to them and get help filling out the paperwork.
Well, that's great. It's good to see that FEMA is there and active and helping out all of Florida. Thank you so much for joining us, Congressman Francis Rooney, former ambassador to the Holy See.
Thank you.
Conservative House Republicans blast a bipartisan health care compromise. A bill written by Senators Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray would protect the subsidies that make insurance more affordable for poor people.
Coming from the Senate, it's laughable. They failed to repeal. They failed to do a big central government health care. They failed to do a skinny bill. And now they want us to do a Democrat bill? I mean, you got to be kidding.
Virginia Representative Dave Bratt tells our Jason Calvi that the Senate health care bill won't work. He says it props up insurance companies without lowering patient deductibles. And as we reported earlier, the compromise also does not stop abortion funding. The U.S. military's top general is asking for patience while they investigate an attack on 4 American soldiers killed in Niger. This, as State Department officials are also weighing in on the role of American diplomacy in fighting terrorism in West Africa and around the world. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us from the State Department, where a briefing happened today. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. State Department officials say engagement with other nations is key to combating terrorism around the world. That means working with countries like Niger, a nation struggling to combat Islamic extremism, and fighting it, officials say, comes at a cost.
We're learning some, but not all, about what happened nearly 3 weeks ago during an ISIS-led ambush in Niger. The top U.S. General, Joseph Dunford, confirming 4 American servicemen died amid a complex situation and a difficult firefight.
We owe the families that have fallen more information, and that's what the investigation is designed to identify.
And it's not only the family members asking for answers. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill also want to know exactly what happened.
Come on, I have questions about it, why 4 men died. That's the question that most Americans want to know.
Dunford says the 4 Special Operations members died on October 4th while on a reconnaissance mission near the village of Tongo Tongo, about 53 miles north of Niger's capital, Niamey.
The assessment by our leaders on the ground at that time was that contact with the enemy was unlikely.
But the team, totaling 12 Americans and 30 Nigerians, did make contact, coming under fire by some 50 local fighters with ties to ISIS. Officials say the militants were carrying small arms, machine guns, and rocket-propelled grenades. The big question? Why it took the team about an hour before requesting help.
I don't know that they thought they needed support prior to that time. I don't know how this attack unfolded.
French jets were scrambled, but took another hour to arrive at the remote location. It was evening by the time they could evacuate the injured and bodies of the dead Americans. Some 800 American service members are stationed in Niger, helping allies fight Islamic militants in the region, like the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram.
Now, some lawmakers are calling for a bigger look into the U.S. military involvement around the world as a result of this ambush. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Corker, says it's time for a new rules on military engagement in foreign countries, which haven't really been updated since the 9/11 attacks. Lauren?
Wyatt, you mentioned the terrorist groups operating in Niger. The country is 80% Islamic. Do these groups attack Christians who are in the minority?
Yes, they have, Lauren. They have done that. Reports say Niger is not on the list of one of the countries with the most persecuted Christians, but we know that terrorists like Boko Haram and ISIS specifically have targeted religious minorities like Christians. And one of the goals in Niger for the United States is to help train their military, their own army, in order to defend their citizens. So that goes for a whole host of countries in that region, in that part of West Africa, where Islamic extremists still have a foothold. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Strong words from the United Nations on the Rohingya refugees.
We're facing a massive refugee crisis. It demands a comprehensive refugee response.
The UN held a one-day conference yesterday aimed at helping refugees in Bangladesh. The UN is hoping to meet calls for more than $400 million in funding to help those fleeing. More than half of the refugees are children. This comes as U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is considering saying that there is ethnic cleansing against Myanmar's Rohingya Muslims. That move would increase pressure for new sanctions. U.S. lawmakers are urging sanctions against Myanmar's military. More than 600,000 refugees have left Myanmar for Bangladesh. Hong Kong's highest court frees two pro-democracy activists. Joshua Wong and Nathan Law are out on bail pending an appeal of their prison sentences. They were convicted of sparking massive protests against China's 2014 decision to restrict elections. The two say they are prepared to go back to prison if they lose their appeal. Joshua Wong has appeared here, as you can see, on EWTN News Nightly. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte seems to be trying to mend fences with Catholics. This week at the funeral for Cardinal Ricardo Vidal, Duterte said he wants to develop a good rapport with church leaders. In the past, the president, who was raised Catholic, has been critical of priests who have spoken out against his deadly war on drugs. A Catholic priest in Kenya dies after being found unconscious Sunday evening. Father Evans Juma Odur, a parish priest in West Kenya, died of head injuries. His burned car was located 3 miles from where he was found. 2 weeks ago, the priest publicly asked the government to stop killing members of the Luo tribe. Tensions in Kenya are high as the country prepares for a repeat presidential election. Pope Francis issues a public correction to the prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship. The Vatican released the letter on Sunday to Cardinal Robert Sarah. It corrects several points made in a commentary in a French publication over the rules of the liturgy. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Ed, it is quite unprecedented for the Pope to write a letter like this to one of his cardinals. How did this come about?
Well, it goes back, Lauren, to the Pope's motu proprio papal decree, which he issued last month called Magnum Principium, in which he authorized the translations of liturgical texts from the Latin to be given, for bishops' conferences, to be given more authority to do that. Up until now, it's been the Vatican that's had the ultimate authority over these translations, and the Pope was given more power to the bishops' conferences. Cardinal Sarah, who's head of the liturgical congregation, wrote an article at the beginning of the month trying to clarify what the Pope meant by this, how much authority the Vatican has and how much bishops' conferences have. And that led to the Pope issuing another letter correcting Cardinal Sarah for his interpretation of the papal decree.
What are the main concerns of the Pope and the Cardinal?
Well, for the Pope, he's trying to decentralize the governance, if you like, of liturgical translations by giving it to bishops' conferences. That's all part of Pope Francis's general approach, is to decentralize, take things away from the Vatican and give them to the bishops. But Cardinal Sarah believes that authority should be kept with the Vatican because Latin is seen as very much a language of unity, and he wants to keep those translations as being as faithful to the Latin as possible.
How do you see this playing out? You've covered the Vatican for a very long time. Will Cardinal Sarah be able to stay in his position given this clear disagreement between him and the Pope over the liturgy?
Well, it's difficult. It's a difficult relationship because they do have different visions. I think it's becoming quite clear that that's the case. And if you have a Pope whose Department of Liturgy is headed by someone who has a very different vision, it's not easy for him to continue. So we're going to have to see just how they work this out, whether Cardinal Sarah remains in post or whether he chooses to resign, or perhaps the Holy Father tries to find a replacement.
Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thank you for joining us, Ed.
Thanks, Lauren.
Coming up, analysis of Congressman Flake's announcement that he's not seeking re-election, plus the Hall of Heroes, more recognition for the newest Catholic Medal of Honor recipient.
l'amore che lo portò alla morte per noi.
Pope Francis says the goal of Christians is understanding the mystery of Christ. At his daily Mass in Rome, the Holy Father says to go to church, pray, and be a good person. But the goal, ultimate goal, is understanding Christ loved you and gave himself to death for you. Callista Gingrich is sworn in as U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. She was confirmed by the Senate last week. An upset on Capitol Hill today as Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona says he will not seek re-election in 2018. He announced it in a fiery speech aimed at the Commander-in-Chief. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, we head back to you again. Tell me, Jason, does the combination of Jeff Flake and this sentiment today, along with the fight that President Trump and Senator Bob Corker are having, suggest a GOP revolt?
It depends on who you talk to. If you talk with Steve Bannon, remember at Values Voter Summit, a gathering of Christian conservatives a few weeks ago, he said it was a season of war against the GOP establishment, so he's probably very happy to see Senator Flake, a more moderate Republican, getting out of the race. Right now, he is in a primary battle over 2018. He's up for re-election, Senator Flake is, and his primary challenger is Kelly Ward. She's a Tea Party Republican who actually lost to Senator John McCain in 2016. She's going to try again this year. She's being backed by Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon did a fundraiser for her just last week, but right now, Jeff Flake, Senator Flake, coming out swinging. He says the Republican Party could become a minority party for a long time if they don't change. He had some very fiery words on the Senate floor earlier today. Take a listen.
I will not be complicit or silent. I've decided that I would be better able to represent the people of Arizona and to better serve my country and my conscience by freeing myself of the political consideration that consume far too much bandwidth and would cause me to compromise far too many principles.
This fight doesn't come out of thin air. He's been a Trump critic in the election, in the primary as well, right here on Capitol Hill. His poll numbers have been sinking in his primary battle with Tea Party Republican Kelly Ward. So that's part of this as well. And he said he really didn't have a path forward in this primary election.
Jason, that he backed the law giving states rights to deny money to family planning centers that provide abortions like Planned Parenthood. What is going to be the impact on that, especially if a Democrat wins his seat?
Some GOP establishment people in Arizona think that Kelly Ward is not going to be able to win the general election against the Democratic challenger. And as you know, here on Capitol Hill, the Democrats have all supported that bill that you're talking about was getting rid of President Obama-era regulation that banned states from defunding Planned Parenthood. Senator Flake voted for that early this term. So you know that the Democratic challenger would more than likely follow the party line on that in allowing the funding of Planned Parenthood there.
Jason Calvi, thank you so much for your analysis, Jason, on Capitol Hill. Retired Army Captain Gary Rose is inducted to the Hall of Heroes at the Pentagon today. The Hall of Heroes is a room at the Pentagon dedicated to the recipients of the Medal of Honor. Captain Rose, a Catholic, yesterday received the military's highest decoration at the White House for his bravery during the Vietnam War. Up next, Catholic surge. New data on the number of Catholics around the world. And an Yiddish stamp of approval for Fatima's 100th anniversary. Today is the feast day of St. Anthony Mary Claret. Born in 1807 in Spain, Anthony was a missionary who served in Cuba. He was later named Archbishop of Santiago. Anthony wrote more than 140 books and participated in the First Vatican Council. An opposition party in Quebec wants to discuss removing a crucifix hanging in the country's National Assembly. The crucifix has been above the Speaker's chair for 81 years. Opponents say a secular government should not be protecting a Roman Catholic symbol. A new study says the number of Catholics in the world is increasing. Figures from the Church's Book of Statistics say there are almost 1.3 billion Catholics, or 17.7% of the world's population. The numbers are up by 12.5 million from last year. And to throw some more numbers at you, there are 625 million Catholics in the Americas. The study also says the Church runs more than 216,000 schools worldwide. Ireland is honoring the 100th anniversary of the apparitions of Fatima with a new stamp. It features a statue of Our Lady and is available across Ireland. That's why I'm wearing green, by the way. October 13th marked the anniversary of the sixth and final apparition of Mary to 3 Portuguese children. I was kidding. Finally tonight, a letter written on the doomed Titanic voyage sells for a small fortune. The document, written by passenger Alexander Holverson, earned $166,000 at auction. The letter, written to the passenger's mother, is dated April 13th, 1912, one day before the ship hit an iceberg and sank in the Atlantic. Holverson was among the 1,500 people to die on the Titanic. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.